Welcome, and thank you for joining us for our Maundy Thursday Reflections. My name is Tim Beschner, and I am the Director of Middle School and Young Adults Ministry here at Chapelgate. Maundy Thursday is a day where we get to reflect and consider Jesus and the disciples in the upper room. Together we're going to look at John 13, when Jesus is in the upper room with his disciples washing their feet. I can only imagine the feeling of the disciples during the Last Supper. It's the Passover, and I'm sure their minds are racing. They're considering the claims that Jesus has made about who he is. Jesus has already given clues of his coming death, and the disciples have to be thinking about the Israelites in the Exodus story when the Israelites are in captivity in Egypt. They're longing for freedom, and the Israelites are ultimately delivered through the blood of the Lamb. As I read, I invite you all to reflect and consider the pace and the tension at which this is written. John is slow and descriptive about how he describes Jesus washing his feet. It's a picture of the care and love of who Jesus is. Let's read John 13, verses 1 through 11. Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, when the devil had already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going back to God, rose from supper. He laid aside his outer garments, and taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, do you wash my feet?" Jesus answered him, "What I am doing you do not understand now, but afterwards you will understand." Peter said to him, "You shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered him, "If I do not wash you, you have no share with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hand and my head." Jesus said to him, "The one who has bathed does not need to wash, except for his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not every one of you." This is the word of the Lord. At the church I worked at right out of college and before I took the job here at Chapelgate, part of our Easter tradition there would be to have what we called a love feast. The church would gather for dinner, we would wash each other's feet, and we would partake in the Lord's Supper. Growing up at Chapelgate, this was foreign to me. For the most part, people do not practice feet washing anymore, and to be honest, I got embarrassingly nervous about it. And I was nervous because I know how disgusting my feet are. Now, this was pre-COVID, but still in our context, people do not touch other people's feet. But I was most nervous about who was going to have to sit next to me and wash my feet. Culturally, feet washing was reserved for the least. It was reserved for the servant or the least honorable. It was an important job, as people would walk around in sandals and their feet were nasty, but it was also not a fun job. Instinctually, my first picture of the Lord's Supper goes to Da Vinci's painting of it, but that picture doesn't really represent the picture in the upper room. In the upper room, Jesus and his disciples would have been lounging at a table a foot or two off the ground, and they would be laying on their sides with maybe an arm propped up, and their feet would have been everywhere. The way the passage reads, it depicts Jesus getting up from the table. He walks to the side. He lays down his garments. He takes a towel around his waist. Then he pours water into a basin. Then he washes his disciples' feet. I picture all the disciples silently kind of watching and being blown away by what is happening. Finally, Jesus gets to Peter, and Peter's reaction seems fair. He says, "Jesus, stop. How can you wash my feet?" And I'm sure Peter was thinking, "I am not worthy of you, Jesus, Son of God, to get on your feet, to get on your knees and wash my feet." But Jesus, in his love for his disciples, takes on the role of a servant to show his love for them. This isn't just a picture of sacrificial service, but is a picture of Jesus' love for his people. All throughout Scripture, we get this picture of God coming down for the sake of loving his people. God comes down to the people at the Tower of Babel to see what they have done. God takes the form of a bush to talk to Moses. And Jesus takes on flesh as he's born in a manger with no room in the inn. Jesus ultimately takes the ultimate place of a servant, and he's ultimately humbled as he's led to the cross, to the place of ultimate humiliation, where he would be mocked and beaten, and he'd be killed for a crime he didn't commit. A few years ago, while I was all grown up, my family was spending some time with my cousin who has younger kids. And my dad was playing Hot Wheels with my baby cousin who's about 5 years old. If you know my dad, you know he's super tall. He's 6'7". And I remember watching my dad lay down on the floor so that he could play Hot Wheels with my cousin. This super tall, older person, don't tell him I said that, is laying on the ground to play Hot Wheels with this 5-year-old. To some degree, that is what Jesus does for us. He comes onto our level. He lowers himself to the place of a servant to love and care for us. Peter honestly admits that Jesus shouldn't wash his feet, and to some degree, Peter is right. But as always, Peter doesn't get the full picture. He sees partially. He gets that he is undeserving of Jesus' love, Jesus stooping to the place of a servant, but he doesn't get that that is who God is. God does that because God is a gracious God. The invitation is the same for you. Jesus invites you to himself, to be saved by the cleansing blood that is shed for you on the cross. And you and I have no business experiencing the forgiveness that Jesus gave us on the cross. But he did it because he loves us, and that is who God is. Not only that, but Jesus invites us into the same love. He invites us to serve others as we have been served. John 13:14 says, "If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet." You could do a really good job at sacrificing yourself for the sake of others, but without the love of Christ shaping your life, all it will lead to is harboring resentment when you attempt to sacrifice yourself, but people betray you. See, Jesus sat in this room. He washed the disciples' feet as a picture of what he was on earth to do. He sat in a room and he gave them this picture of humble service. He humbly served his disciples, knowing that one of them would betray him, that one of them would deny him 3 times, and one of them would doubt that he could even be resurrected until he placed his hands into his wounds. Verse 1 tells us that Jesus is able to do this because he loved them. Not only did he love them, but he loved them to the end. Washing their dirty feet is just one small picture of what is to come. Jesus' love to the end would bring him to the cross to take the full punishment of their sin, defeating it, and then being resurrected in 3 days. Consider Jesus' love for you, and let that transform how you love others. Maundy Thursday gives us a picture of what is to come. We look forward to everything going on this Easter season, and we hope to see you.